Anyway, guys, I would love to hear your thoughts on these down below. Do you agree with my pick? In today's video, I'm going to be sharing the best and worst eyeshadow palettes of 2023, at least according to me. I'm going to be sharing my top 5 favorite palettes that I've used the most, and then the top 5 that disappointed me the most. So if that sounds good, let's go ahead and jump right in and get started. All right, guys, so why don't we go ahead and start with the bottom 5 first. That way we can end the video on a more positive note. So the first one was an early release in 2023 towards the beginning of the year, and it's actually a drugstore palette. It's, I think, my only drugstore palette in the bottom 5. So this is the Milani Luminoso palette, and this one was so disappointing on so many levels. As you may or may not know, I'm not the biggest fan of Milani's eyeshadow formula these days. I liked their older eyeshadow formula. If you guys remember the Soft and Sultry palette or Pure Passion, those palettes were amazing. And then once they started with the gilded palettes, I didn't love them as much. They're not the worst palettes in the world. I just feel like they're not as long lasting on the eyes. They're not quite as pigmented. But this one was just a whole nother level of bad. The matte shades were a little dusty. I really had to build them up to get a good level of pigmentation. But I think what definitely disappointed me the most about this one was the shimmer shades. At least in their gilded palettes, the shimmers are a little more foiled and metallic. They show up on the eyes. These really were more of a satin finish. It just wasn't their usual formula, so something seemed off about it. And also, all of the colors were very similar, and I felt like they looked close on the eyes. You have a lot of these peachy tones in here, and I get it. It's supposed to be the Luminoso palette after their Luminoso blush. But in addition to not loving the formula, I just felt like this didn't have the variety that I was looking for, and I felt like all the looks that I did with this palette kind of came out the same. So I used this a couple of times when I first got it, and then I put it in a drawer, and it's been there ever since. It's just not something that I reach for. The other 4 palettes in my bottom 5 are more recent releases, and we've been seeing this trend kind of more and more happening where brands are releasing their bigger palettes in the later half of the year, like from the end of August all the way through the holidays. So these are all more recent kind of fall release palettes. So the first one is the Tarte Big Ego palette. So this one didn't really get a whole lot of fanfare. I didn't hear a ton of people talking about it. I guess because when you look at it, it's kind of a little bit boring. I hesitated before I bought this. I just kept telling myself I have these colors over and over again. And even now, I mean, this released a couple of months ago, but if you look on the Sephora or Ulta website, there are only like 9 or 10 reviews for this palette. So it kind of goes to show you that not a lot of people really purchased it, but I did, and I definitely regret it for a couple of reasons. Number one being, this doesn't seem like Tarte's normal formula. The matte shades were very dusty. They were not pigmented. I felt like I had to keep going in and building these up over and over again. And the shimmer shades were also a bit on the disappointing side. Some of them felt okay, while others felt a little more scratchy. And there are 2 in the bottom row here that it like blows my mind that this palette even got past their quality control. I just kept thinking, what were they thinking? Because it's really that bad. So let me just show you them up close. This one, Speak Up, right here, and this one called Unique are the flakiest glitters you have ever seen. They just come off in these chunks. They're so messy. Chunks are just kind of falling everywhere. I don't get it. And in general, I just feel like they wasted a big opportunity with this palette. I mean, it could have made a really nice neutral palette with a few pops of color. I mean, you have some really pretty rosy tones in the top row. You have some cooler and warmer neutrals. You have these beautiful kind of iridescent blues down here. So it could have been a nice palette for those of us who really enjoy wearing neutrals, but the whole thing to me just kind of feels really thrown together and really rushed, and like there wasn't a lot of thought put into it, especially when it comes to the formula. So this is definitely in my bottom 5. Another one that I had to mention as well is the Too Faced Maple Syrup Pancakes palette. I saw very mixed reviews on this one, with some people saying that it was actually really good, other people saying it was horrible. I found myself siding with the people who said that this was pretty terrible because it is just so dry. It's not the same formula that we were used to seeing from Too Faced in the past. The peach palette, the gingerbread palettes, the chocolate bars, those all had such creamy, really soft metallic shimmer shades, and the mattes were really velvety and smooth, and I don't get that with this palette at all. Most of the shimmer shades, with only a couple of exceptions, were very scratchy, they were hard to pick up, and that's with my finger. Forget about picking them up with a brush because I didn't have any luck with that at all. And while the matte shades were okay and they performed decently enough, they just were not that same really soft velvety formula that they've had in the past. They weren't as smooth. I felt like sometimes they didn't blend out as easily as I wanted them to, or they would get a little bit patchy. It also was supposed to smell like maple syrup and pancakes, and I couldn't smell anything with this palette compared to the ones in the tin packaging that they used to have that always smelled really strongly. Whether you like that or you don't like it, if it's one of the selling points, then you should be able to smell it, and I can't smell it at all. And another thing is, I felt like this color story was so similar to the pumpkin spice. I know I compared the two when I did my video review, but I mean, they're so close, and the pumpkin spice just has a much more superior formula. This was their older formula. Again, I feel like this was such a missed opportunity for Too Faced. They do come out with a palette like this every single fall that always has some sort of a food theme, and they're usually really cute, but this was just so disappointing. And I can only hope that at some point they will realize this and go back to the formula that they had in the tin packaging, because it was just so much better. Another really disappointing release was this palette from Charlotte Tilbury. It was her holiday palette called the Beautyverse. I did a whole video on this. Actually, in my thumbnail, I just wrote, "Don't do it," because this palette was such a letdown. So inside you have 9 shades, mostly neutrals. You have the matte shades up at the top. You have 4 mattes and 5 shimmer shades. So it started out okay. When I was swatching the mattes in the top, these have such a soft and smooth feel. They almost feel like cream shadows, and I wasn't sure if they were or if they were just a really creamy powder, but either way, they are incredibly blendable and soft, and I really actually liked those. Then I swatched this blue one, which was so insanely metallic and gorgeous and pigmented, and I was like getting really excited. Okay, this palette is going to be awesome. Yeah, the last half of the palette was so disappointing. The other 4 shades are all toppers, and toppers are fine. They have a place. No, they're not my favorite formula, and I much prefer a more pigmented metallic shimmer shade, but I can deal with some toppers in a palette because they do add that kind of sparkly wash on top of a look. It's okay, but I can dig my finger into this pan, and look what happens. Nothing. Nothing shows up, or it hardly shows up at all. They just feel so hard pressed into the pan. You just can't pick up anything. Not to mention, they also just feel scratchy. You can actually feel the glittery particles. They really just don't function as well as I was hoping that they would. And then when I actually looked at the palette all swatched out too, I realized that I didn't love all of these colors together. I felt like the neutral matte shades that she chose, except for the pink one, are too warm for the rest of the shades. They all have a cooler, more ethereal kind of vibe. And then she selected these 2 warmer, heavier browns, and they just don't go together, in my opinion. I would have loved to see maybe some soft gray shadows or taupes, or just something that was a little bit cooler, maybe a purple. I mean, she could have kept it relatively neutral. It wouldn't have had to be like a bright purple, but maybe a purple that leans a little grayish, or just something that would better complement these really beautiful beautiful shades down here. Not that they show up anyway, but if they did. So this palette was another huge bust for me. And then the fifth palette in my bottom 5 would have to be the Natasha Denona Xenon Midi palette. So this one, I bought it to review, but I kind of knew going into it that I wasn't gonna love it, and it's not something that I'm gonna really reach for all that often. It's just way too monochrome. It looks like grayscale, and even the slight colors that were shown in the promo photos don't show up at all the same way in person. And I did a whole video on this palette, so if you're curious as to kind of more in-depth reasons why I don't love this palette, then you could definitely check that out. I did try to do different looks with it to see if I could get some different looks or if everything came out the same. And I was able to get a couple looks out of it, but it's mostly a one-trick pony. It's something that I would reach for if I just want a dark, smoky gray eye. And I have the Colourpop Blowing Smoke palette, which is kind of like a 9-pan version of this, very, very similar, to the point where if you have that one or the mini Xenon palette, the 5-pan version that she did of this, I don't really feel like you need 15 of the same shades. It's just too much, and I don't think it's worth spending all of that money on just to get shades that are almost repeating over and over again. So I have no complaints about the formula with this one. This is purely just a color story that I really didn't like and didn't identify with, and I can't see myself using too much in the future. So anyway, those are my bottom 5 palettes. Let's go ahead and talk about my favorites. Starting with one that came out in the very beginning of last year, and it honestly has become one of my favorite go-to palettes. You guys probably know what I'm gonna say. It's the Doll Squad 2.0 palette from Doll 10. So now I wanna make it clear that I have never really been a huge fan of Doll 10's eyeshadows in the past, but they came out with their Doll Squad 1 palette, which again was a favorite of mine. It's no longer available, so I don't wanna really show that, but it was super similar to this. It just had slightly cooler tones, and then they came out with this one, which is more of an all warm tone neutral palette, but it is so much more versatile than you would ever think that a palette like this would be, and the formula is insanely good. It's a talc-free formula. It's made in Italy. The matte shades are so soft, and they have this really rich, velvety feel. They blend out beautifully. They remind me a little bit of Natasha Denona's formula, but I feel like I can blend these even easier than I can hers. They have great pigmentation. They grip to the eyes well, and there are only 3 shimmer shades in this palette, but they are insanely beautiful. They have that really rich, soft, metallic finish. They really pop on the eyes. They don't have a bunch of crumbly fallout. They're just ultra smooth. I was honestly blown away when I started using this palette. And another reason that I love it is because it has the perfect gradient. Sometimes you get a neutral palette and there's just kind of like shades that are all over the place, different tones that go from dark to light, but there's not a lot of like mid-tones and in between for blending. And with this one, I feel like it can always get a perfect blend. So let me just kind of show you an example. So I normally always start with one of these two. If I want a look that's a little more warm, I start with this one for my crease, or I'll use this one if I want something like not quite as warm. These are just a perfect lighter transition tones. And then you have this one that's just a slight step up from those, and also this one right here. So again, if I want to go warmer, I'll use this one. If I want to go slightly cooler, I'll use this one after I use this. Then you have this brown that's one more step up from that. Then you have these two that are deeper for the outer corner. You have these up here that are great for blending by the brow bone and kind of getting rid of any of the harsh edges. So you have so many mattes to play with that are just one step away from each other, which I love. You don't have like some really light shades and then it skips to some really dark ones. You have all of these mid-tones to play with in here, and I just love that. I feel like I can get a really nice gradient with any look that I do. So it may seem a little bit boring just to look at it. Honestly, when I first got this palette earlier in the year, I saw it and I was like, oh, it's a warm neutral palette, like yay. But it's one of those things where you see it, you're not really super enthused, but you try it anyway, and then you end up just finding that you're reaching for it every day. And that's what happened with me. It's really just a pleasure to use, from the formula to the really easy to wear colors. So love this so much. Next on my list was another really exciting release around Halloween time, and that was the Nomad Ghost Town palette. So this one, from the packaging to the colors that are inside, just so well done. And this was actually my first Nomad palette that I ever purchased. I felt like the ones in the past were a little bit too colorful, a little out of my comfort zone. This was the first one that really spoke to me. So looking at the front cover, you have like the old West town, and then it transforms into the spooky ghost town. Inside, the shades are just so beautiful. They're a little more earthy, a little more grungy. Even though it's colorful, it's not bright colorful. It's really those easier to wear shades. You do have some straight up like brown neutral colors, but even, you know, with the blues are a little more on the gray side. They're not a bright blue. And then you have the greens, which again, they're more earthy greens. It's nothing neon or nothing that's gonna just pop right out at you. There's a really pretty rosy color that's more on the subtle side. So this is just one that is extremely easy to wear if you are somebody who normally likes neutrals, but you want to get into a little bit of color. And on top of that, Nomad has a really great formula. I had heard about it in the past, again, was excited to try it. I think this might have even been a newer formula for them, but I was just so impressed with the really metallic and rich shimmery shades, the mattes feeling that super soft velvety texture. Overall, just such a solid palette and a fun palette at the same time, because I think the packaging is adorable. Then from Colourpop, we have the 1111 palette, and I actually selected this one over the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette. I was kind of between the two, and I realized that I just used this one so much more than the I Need a Nude. And the reason for that is because I felt like I Need a Nude has so many topper shades, which I mentioned before, not the biggest fan of. I'm okay with like one or two in a palette, but she has a bunch of them in there, and I feel like they all end up looking the same on my eyes. And with this one, I love that the shimmer shades are full pigment. I'm actually wearing this palette today, and I just wear this so often, and it's really almost an identical color story to the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude. I was kind of blown away when I saw this come out so shortly afterwards. It has that perfect mix of the warm neutrals, the cool neutrals, and I'm not saying that I Need a Nude is a bad palette. It definitely isn't, just that I reach for this one a little bit more. Another new release that just came out very recently, but has already made its way to the top of my favorites, is the Dragon Eye palette from What's Up Beauty. So you guys know how much I love their Geodes palette. I've talked about it so many times on my channel. This one is basically like a sister palette to that. It has 7 either duochrome or multi-chrome shadows, basically 7 shifty shades. It is again a made in Italy talc-free formula, just like the Doll 10 one, and these shadows just perform so beautifully. These duochromes are not toppers. They have this beautiful creamy feel, and they swipe on with full pigment. The matte shades, again, are so soft and silky with that like really velvety quality that just makes them feel so soft. They're nicely pigmented, yet easy to blend out on the eyes. So this is just an incredibly underrated formula and just an underrated brand in general that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. Even though I've only had it for a couple of weeks, I've been using it constantly, and I'm so impressed. So this is definitely another one to check out for sure. And then coming in at number 5 is another Colourpop release. It's the Cloud9 palette. This is another one that just came out recently, but I've been using it a lot. Really, between this one and Dragon Eye, I've been playing with these and having so much fun with them over the last few weeks. So this one is definitely more of a neutral palette, but it's very, very cool toned compared to the 1111, which pulls a little bit warmer. This one is basically all cool tones. And one thing that I will say about this one as well is that the shimmer shades, not all of them are really metallic and bright. Some of them are a little more subtle and have a satin-like finish to them. So if you're somebody who wants eyeshadows that are really gonna pop, these may not do that. Like I said, there's 1 or 2 in here that do, but the rest are just really subtle. And that's fine for me, because while I do like a metallic shade that's gonna really pop on the eyes, sometimes I do just wanna wear something that's a little bit more subtle. Like if I'm going to church, I don't normally do my makeup, you know, super bold and crazy. So that's one of the things I really like about this palette, is just that it's so soft and subtle. And a lot of people have asked me how this compares to Stone Cold Fox. It is very similar in a lot of ways. So I have Stone Cold Fox right here, which is one of their mega palettes. And honestly, I would say a large majority of the shades are the same in here. Definitely the neutrals. This silvery shade right here, the one that's kind of like a silvery blue, you also have in this palette in the second row. But there are also a couple of shades in Cloud9 that you're not going to get in here because Stone Cold Fox is really largely neutral. So one of the shades that Cloud9 has that you won't find in Stone Cold Fox is this one, Heads Up. It's a beautiful, shifty, metallic bluish silver. And this one makes a huge impact on the eyes. It's really beautiful. Also, Stone Cold Fox doesn't have this purple one down here, and it also doesn't have this midnight blue with the sparkle. So there are 3 shades I would say that are more unique to this palette. Otherwise, the rest are pretty close to this. So if you have Stone Cold Fox, unless you really want those couple of extra shades in here, you probably don't need it, but at the same time, even if you have Stone Cold Fox, you still might want this if you're somebody who travels a lot and you don't want to like lug this huge palette around. I feel that way. I used to take Stone Cold Fox with me on trips, but now I feel like I could take this and kind of have similar colors. Or if you're somebody who just never wanted to buy this one because it was too big and too overwhelming, this is like a nice little edited down version of it. So anyway, knowing how close it is to this one, which is already one of my all-time favorite palettes in my collection, I had a feeling right away that this one was going to make my top 5 for this year. So anyway, guys, I would love to hear all of your thoughts on these down below. What were your favorite palettes of the year and your least favorite? I'd love to hear your thoughts as always and chat with you down in the comments. Also, as you saw, this is day 1 of Vlogmas. I'm going to be doing them hopefully the whole month of December, as long as everybody stays healthy and nothing crazy happens. I'll be doing videos 5 days a week. I'm skipping the weekends just for my own sanity. So if that sounds good, be sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss notifications for when the videos come out. And I want to thank you all so much for taking time to watch this video. I really, really, truly appreciate it. If you have some extra time and you'd like to watch some more of my videos, I'll just put one right up here for you to check out next. Thank you guys so much. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye, guys.